Richard Alden's life seemed untouchable. Wealth, power, and respect wrapped him in a world of luxury few could imagine. But when Lena Morris, a young college student half his age, stepped into his life, desire quickly turned into danger. Within months, their secret affair would spiral into obsession, betrayal, and murder, leaving the wealthy businessman dead and a small American town asking one haunting question: how far would someone go for love, and what would they destroy to keep it? Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. In the quiet, picturesque town of Greenridge, Massachusetts, few names carried as much weight as Richard Alden's. At 58 years old, he was the kind of man people described as having it all. His sprawling mansion sat on a hill overlooking the town, surrounded by manicured gardens, fountains, and long stone pathways that shimmered under the soft glow of lanterns at night. Richard had built his fortune in real estate, turning forgotten properties into luxury developments across the East Coast. His face often appeared in the local papers, smiling at charity events or shaking hands with community leaders. To the outside world, he was the perfect image of success. A man who had earned his place through hard work and intelligence. But behind that polished exterior, his life was lonelier than anyone realized. 5 years earlier, Richard's wife, Helen, had passed away unexpectedly after a brief illness. Their marriage had lasted more than 2 decades, and her absence left a silence that echoed through every corner of the mansion. For months after her death, he avoided social events and rarely spoke to friends. His work became his only company. He poured himself into business deals and projects, trying to fill the emptiness with busyness. Yet every night when he returned to the grand but hollow home, he felt the same crushing solitude. The laughter, the dinners, the quiet conversations, they were all gone, replaced by the low hum of the wind outside his window. Those who knew Richard said he changed after Helen's death. The sharp, ambitious businessman softened. He became generous, even sentimental. He began donating large sums to local charities, funding scholarships, and supporting the university nearby. Some said it was his way of finding meaning again. Others whispered that he was simply trying to buy peace of mind. But Richard wasn't thinking about reputation or legacy. He just wanted to feel connected to something again, to someone. Every morning, he took the same walk through Greenridge Park, often stopping by the same bench near the pond. He'd watch families, young couples, students and retirees pass by, their laughter and chatter a faint reminder of the life he once had. Despite his wealth and influence, Richard Alden was a man adrift, looking for something he couldn't name. His employees adored him, but kept their distance. He was kind yet private, always polite but never open. He had no children, no close relatives. A few colleagues had tried to set him up on dates, but he always declined. Love, he told himself, belonged to the young. He had lived his time. But deep down, he longed for companionship, for someone to look at him the way Helen once did, with warmth instead of admiration, with affection instead of awe. The world, however, had other plans for him. In the spring of 2022, as the flowers bloomed and the days grew longer, a chance encounter at a charity gala would change the course of Richard Alden's life forever. It began as nothing more than a polite introduction, a brief conversation among hundreds of guests. Yet that fleeting moment would lead him down a path of passion, obsession, and ultimately, tragedy. What Richard didn't know that evening was that the loneliness he carried would soon be replaced, not by love, but by danger. And before the year was over, his perfect life on the hill would come to a violent end. The annual Greenridge University Charity Gala was one of the town's most anticipated events, a night of music, speeches, and polished smiles. It drew business owners, alumni, and local figures eager to mingle and make donations. Richard Alden attended mostly out of obligation. His company sponsored part of the event, and though he preferred quiet evenings, his assistant convinced him to show his face for at least an hour. He arrived in a tailored black suit, looking every bit the successful gentleman everyone expected him to be. Beneath that calm exterior, however, he felt detached from the glittering crowd, a silent observer in a room full of laughter. That was until his gaze landed on a young woman near the stage, arranging floral centerpieces with quiet focus. Her name was Lena Morris, a 22-year-old psychology student working part-time for the university's event department. She wasn't from wealth or privilege. Her mother was a nurse, and her father had left when she was a child. She juggled studies, work, and mounting student loans, often surviving on coffee and determination. That night, she wore a simple black dress and an exhausted smile, unaware that she had caught the attention of one of the wealthiest men in the room. When the event coordinator introduced her to Richard as one of the university's most hard-working students, he was instantly intrigued. Lena spoke politely, her voice soft but confident. She thanked him for his donations to the scholarship fund, mentioning how much those contributions meant to students like her. There was something refreshing about her honesty, something untouched by the world of power and pretense he was used to. To her, he wasn't Richard Alden the businessman, just another guest making small talk. That subtle indifference sparked something inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed again. Richard donated to another university fundraiser, and Lena was there managing the event staff. Each time, their interactions grew longer. What began as formal greetings turned into light conversations about art, travel, and ambition. Richard admired her intelligence. She seemed to listen to him, not for his money or name, but with genuine curiosity. For Lena, his attention was both flattering and mysterious. He represented a life she had only glimpsed through magazine covers and passing cars, a world far removed from her small apartment and overworked schedule. Soon he invited her to lunch, then dinner. He told himself it was mentorship, a kind gesture to help a deserving student. Yet the dinners became more frequent, the conversations more personal. Lena found herself drawn to his calmness, his experience, the way he seemed to notice every detail about her, the color she wore, the books she mentioned, even the way she smiled when nervous. By summer, their connection had quietly turned into something more intimate. Richard began sending her thoughtful gifts, a watch for her exams, a bouquet after a presentation. Eventually, he offered to pay her next semester's tuition, claiming it was a scholarship of his own. Lena hesitated, torn between gratitude and discomfort, but financial pressure spoke louder than pride. She accepted. Friends noticed a change in her. She dressed differently, seemed more confident, more secretive. She told no one the full truth about who was helping her. Meanwhile, Richard felt alive again. For the first time since Helen's death, he had someone who made him feel needed. He believed he had found companionship, perhaps even love. But while he saw their relationship as a new beginning, Lena saw it as something temporary, a fragile arrangement that couldn't last in the real world. Still, neither of them realized that what had started as a chance meeting at a charity gala was about to spiral into a dangerous entanglement that neither could escape. As the weeks turned into months, Richard Alden and Lena Morris grew closer, bound together by secrecy and the illusion of affection. Their meetings became more frequent, more daring. Richard's mansion, once silent and cold, now glowed with life again. He would cook elaborate dinners, play soft jazz, and tell her stories from his travels around the world. Lena listened, smiling politely, though a part of her remained distant. She admired his sophistication, but she also felt the imbalance, the way his world overshadowed hers. The gifts, the money, the lavish attention, it all came with a weight she didn't fully understand until much later. Richard found comfort in her presence. She made him feel younger, revived. When he looked at her, he saw a second chance at happiness, a reason to wake up each morning. But for Lena, their relationship was complicated. She told herself she cared for him, but deep down she knew it was not love. It was survival, an exchange of stability for affection, of luxury for freedom from her financial struggles. She was a student with bills to pay and a future to secure, and Richard was offering her a shortcut to a better life. The affair remained hidden from the public eye. Richard was careful. He never brought her to crowded restaurants or events. They met in quiet places, away from watchful eyes. Still, rumors began to spread. His driver once mentioned seeing a young woman leaving the mansion late at night. A neighbor spotted her car parked in the long driveway on several weekends. Whispers began to circulate through town, and soon the story reached the university campus. Lena started feeling the pressure. She became nervous, distracted in her classes, afraid that someone might connect the dots. Her roommate noticed the designer handbag, the gold bracelet, the new car. When asked where it all came from, Lena laughed it off, saying she'd gotten lucky with a research grant. But she knew the truth was too dangerous to admit. The fear of exposure lingered in her mind like a shadow. Richard, on the other hand, seemed unaware of how fragile the situation had become. He was lost in a haze of affection, convinced that he and Lena had something real. He spoke about taking her to Europe after graduation, about helping her start her own business. Each promise made her more uneasy. What began as gratitude now felt like obligation. She didn't want to hurt him, but she couldn't see herself in his world forever. As summer approached, the tension between them grew. Richard's calls became more frequent, his questions more possessive. He wanted to know where she was, who she spent time with, what she did when they weren't together. Lena started avoiding him, claiming to be busy with studies, yet she couldn't completely walk away, not when he had done so much for her. Every gift, every favor became another invisible chain tying her to him. What neither of them realized was that their secret had already begun to unravel. The line between affection and control was blurring fast, and the comfortable illusion they had built was cracking. Somewhere beneath the calm surface of their affair, something dark and irreversible was beginning to take shape, something that would soon turn love into resentment and generosity into deadly obsession. By late summer, the warmth that once surrounded Richard Alden and Lena Morris had turned into tension so thick it could no longer be ignored. The sweetness of their secret affair began to rot under the weight of jealousy, guilt, and fear. Richard had grown possessive, consumed by the thought of losing her. What started as admiration turned into obsession. He wanted to know where she went, who she spoke to, and why she sometimes ignored his calls. His loneliness had twisted into dependency, and he couldn't bear the idea that she might one day walk away. Lena, on the other hand, was suffocating. What had once felt like safety now felt like a cage lined with velvet. Richard's wealth and affection had given her comfort, but it also came with control. He asked her to quit her part-time job at the library, saying she no longer needed to work when he could provide everything. He wanted her to spend more time at his mansion, to be part of his quiet, orderly world. But Lena's life was just beginning. She had classes, friends, and dreams that didn't fit within his isolated estate. She began to resent the gifts that once thrilled her, seeing them now as symbols of the freedom she had traded away. What made it worse was the guilt she carried. For weeks she had been seeing someone else, a fellow student named Kyle Benson. He was her age, easygoing, and full of the youthful energy she missed. He didn't know about Richard, or at least not the full truth. She had told him that she occasionally helped an older businessman with consulting work. Kyle didn't question it, he trusted her. But when the affair with Richard began to consume her life, Lena started meeting Kyle in secret, desperate to feel young again, to feel like herself. One evening, while Lena was at Richard's mansion, he noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly. She tried to ignore it, but his curiosity got the better of him. When she went to the kitchen, he picked up her phone and saw messages from Kyle, playful, intimate words that shattered him. The betrayal hit him like a storm. When Lena returned, she found him pale and trembling, the phone clutched tightly in his hand. His questions came fast, sharp, each one colder than the last. She tried to explain, to calm him, but the damage was done. That night ended with shouting, tears, and silence that stretched into days. After that confrontation, everything changed. Richard began calling her constantly, leaving voicemails filled with both pleading and anger. He sent flowers, letters, even appeared near her campus, waiting in his car just to see her face. Lena told him she needed space, but he refused to accept it. She started feeling watched, trapped between his devotion and her own growing fear. By early September, Lena decided to end things for good. She confided in a close friend that she was dogged, that the relationship had become too heavy, too dangerous. She planned to tell Richard after her classes that week, unaware that he was already unraveling emotionally. The thought of losing her pushed him to a breaking point, and while she believed she could simply walk away, the truth was far darker. The end she wanted would come sooner than she imagined, but not in the way she expected. Within days, Richard Alden would be found dead, and the life she had tried so desperately to escape would become the center of a murder investigation that shocked the entire town. The morning of September 14th began quietly in Greenridge, the sky painted in shades of gray as light rain touched the empty streets. Inside the grand mansion on the hill, everything seemed still, too still. When Richard Alden's housekeeper arrived at her usual time around 8 a.m., she immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door, which was always locked, stood slightly ajar. She called out his name but received no answer. The faint smell of wine lingered in the air, mixed with something metallic she couldn't quite place. When she stepped into the living room, she froze. Richard lay motionless near the base of the staircase, his head resting in a pool of dark, dried blood. The glass coffee table was shattered, and one of the chairs was overturned. His eyes were half open, fixed on the ceiling as if caught mid-thought. Panic spread through her trembling hands as she called the police. Within minutes, the mansion was filled with flashing lights and murmuring officers. At first glance, investigators considered the possibility of an accident. The marble staircase was steep, and Richard was known to enjoy a few glasses of wine in the evenings. Maybe he had slipped, but something about the scene didn't fit. The position of his body was unusual, the blood spatter inconsistent with a simple fall. A broken wine glass lay far from the body, and a faint smear of blood trailed from the living room toward the back door. Even stranger, one of the mansion's security cameras had been unplugged, the cable neatly coiled beside the outlet. Detective Aaron Walsh, the lead investigator, was quick to notice the inconsistencies. She ordered a full sweep of the property. Nothing appeared stolen except for Richard's wristwatch, a limited edition piece worth nearly $20,000, and his phone, which was missing. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that whoever had come into the house had been invited or already had access. On the kitchen counter, police found an open bottle of red wine and 2 glasses, one still half full. It was clear he had company the night before. The autopsy revealed that Richard had died from blunt force trauma to the head, most likely caused by a hard object, though no weapon was found. The estimated time of death was around 11:30 p.m. the previous night. Investigators searched the security system's backup drive, but found that several hours of footage had been deleted. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase what happened. News of Richard's death spread quickly through Greenridge. To the public, it was a shocking accident, the tragic end of a beloved philanthropist. But for those who knew him closely, suspicion began to surface. His assistant mentioned that Richard had seemed distraught recently, worried about a personal situation he never explained. A neighbor recalled hearing raised voices coming from the mansion 2 nights before. Detectives began retracing his final steps, examining his phone records and bank transactions. That's when they found something unusual. Just 3 days before his death, Richard had transferred $50,000 to the account of a young woman named Lena Morris. When questioned about it, Lena claimed it was a tuition loan, a generous gesture from a mentor, but to investigators, it was more than a coincidence. The timeline, the deleted footage, the missing watch, everything pointed to something deliberate. What seemed like a tragic accident was slowly being revealed as a calculated act, and the closer they looked, the clearer it became that Richard Alden's final night had been anything but peaceful. The investigation into Richard Alden's death grew more complex with each passing day. Detectives pored over every inch of his mansion, looking for overlooked details. The discovery of the $50,000 transfer to Lena Morris shifted their focus toward her almost immediately. On paper, it seemed innocent. a generous loan from an older benefactor to a struggling student, but the timing was impossible to ignore. The transfer had occurred only 72 hours before Richard's death. Investigators began to suspect that it was not a gift of kindness, but part of a final plea to keep her close. Detectives visited Lena at her campus apartment. She appeared nervous but composed, dressed simply, her eyes red from tears. She told them she was devastated to hear of Richard's passing, and that their relationship had been purely professional. According to her, Richard had been a mentor who occasionally helped her financially, and she had last seen him a few days before his death. But when they questioned her about her phone location data, her story began to crumble. Records showed that her phone had pinged off a cell tower less than a mile from Richard's mansion on the night of his death, at 11:12 p.m., barely 20 minutes before he was killed. When confronted with that evidence, Lena claimed she had gone to return some of his belongings, insisting that he was alive when she left. She said they had spoken briefly, that he seemed upset, and that she left after an argument. Detectives noted inconsistencies in her timeline, and her shifting tone raised more suspicion. The following day, officers searched her apartment with a warrant. They found a single black leather glove tucked behind a dresser. At first it seemed ordinary, until forensic analysis revealed traces of Richard's blood on the cuff. Even more incriminating was the faint scent of her floral perfume embedded in the fabric, matching a brand Richard had purchased for her weeks earlier. As the evidence piled up, Lena's life began to unravel. News of her connection to Richard spread across campus, turning her from a promising student into the center of scandal. Her classmates whispered, professors kept their distance, and reporters camped outside her building. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging. They uncovered text messages that showed Richard had been pleading with Lena in the days leading up to his death, begging her not to leave him. One message read, "Please come by tonight. We need to talk. I can fix everything." She never replied, but her phone data placed her near his home that very night. Then came the most unexpected twist. A fingerprint found on Richard's car door didn't belong to Lena. It matched a young man named Kyle Benson. He was a student at the same university and, as detectives soon discovered, Lena's boyfriend. The revelation changed everything. If Lena hadn't been alone that night, then Kyle might have been involved too. When police brought him in for questioning, his hands shook, his voice trembled, and his story shifted with each interview. What had started as a simple investigation into a tragic death was now spiraling into a web of deceit, jealousy, and hidden motives. The detectives realized they were no longer just looking for a killer. They were unraveling the final hours of a twisted love triangle that had turned deadly. Kyle Benson was barely 22, a business major with an unremarkable record and a calm, polite demeanor. When police first brought him in for questioning, he seemed confused, even frightened, as if the situation were something happening to someone else. He admitted to knowing Lena Morris, but claimed he had no idea who Richard Alden was. It didn't take long for that lie to collapse. Detectives had already found text messages linking him to Lena, as well as a photo of Richard's mansion on his phone, taken only days before the murder. When confronted, Kyle broke down, his composure shattering. What spilled out next changed the course of the investigation. He confessed that Lena had told him about Richard weeks before the killing. According to Kyle, she described the older man as controlling and manipulative, someone who wouldn't let her move on with her life. She had told Kyle she was scared that Richard might ruin her reputation or even harm her if she tried to end things. Kyle, desperate to protect her, agreed to confront Richard, to make him back off. As Lena had allegedly said, the plan, he insisted, was never to hurt him, only to scare him enough so that he'd leave her alone. On the night of September 13th, Lena picked him up in her car and drove toward the mansion. She told him Richard wouldn't expect her that late, but she had a spare key from her frequent visits. Kyle said he waited outside while Lena went in first. A few minutes later, she returned and told him Richard was in the living room, drinking wine. That's when Kyle entered. What happened next, he claimed, was a blur. Richard was startled, angry, and demanded to know who he was. Words escalated into shouts, and then into a physical struggle. Kyle remembered pushing Richard away, then hearing a loud crack as the older man fell backward, his head striking the marble floor. The silence that followed was unbearable. Panicking, Kyle called for Lena, who rushed into the room. She froze at the sight of Richard's body, then told Kyle to leave everything to her. She unplugged the security camera cable, grabbed Richard's watch and wiped the doorknob with her sleeve. Kyle said she looked calm, almost detached, as if she had rehearsed it. He followed her instructions, taking the watch with him so it would look like a robbery. Then they fled, driving in silence through the empty streets, until she dropped him off near his apartment. Detectives were skeptical of his story. While Kyle admitted to being in the house, he painted Lena as the manipulative mastermind who orchestrated everything. Yet, when they examined Lena's messages, parts of his claim were supported. There were deleted texts between them from that night, recovered through forensic software, where Lena wrote, "Once it's done, it'll all be over." To investigators, it sounded chillingly close to a plan. Still, the question of intent remained. Was Richard's death an accident born of fear and impulse, or was it a premeditated act fueled by greed and desperation? Prosecutors believed it was both. A crime that began as emotional chaos and ended in cold calculation. As the case unfolded, it became clear that neither Lena nor Kyle could fully escape blame. Each had played a role in the chain of choices that ended a man's life, and while their stories contradicted one another, one truth stood out above the rest. Love, when tainted by power and secrecy, could turn into something deadly. The trial of Lena Morris and Kyle Benson drew national attention, turning the quiet town of Greenridge into the center of a media storm. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, broadcasting every new development to an eager public, hungry for scandal. To many it was the perfect true crime tragedy: a wealthy older man, a young college student, and a jealous boyfriend, all caught in a storm of greed, deceit, and fatal passion. But behind the sensational headlines, the trial revealed a darker, more complicated truth about human weakness and the cost of choices made in desperation. Lena arrived at court each day looking fragile but composed, dressed in plain clothes instead of her usual elegance. She no longer resembled the confident young woman Richard had fallen for. Her attorney painted her as a victim, someone manipulated by both men, trapped between a possessive older lover and a volatile young boyfriend. They argued that she had never wanted Richard dead, that she was simply trying to escape a situation that had grown dangerous and suffocating. Lena maintained that Kyle acted on his own, and she had no idea he intended to confront Richard that night. Kyle's defense told a different story. His lawyer described him as a naive young man blinded by love, manipulated by Lena's emotional pleas. They claimed Lena used Kyle's affection to do what she couldn't do herself, end things with Richard permanently. In court, Kyle looked pale and remorseful, his voice trembling as he described the night of the killing. He said the confrontation spiraled out of control, that he never meant to harm Richard, only to frighten him. His words painted a picture of panic and regret. But the jury wasn't easily convinced. The prosecution, however, was relentless. They presented forensic evidence: the blood-stained glove, the deleted texts, and the missing footage from the mansion's security system. They showed the jury bank records, proving the $50,000 transfer and suggesting Lena's growing financial dependence on Richard. They emphasized how she stood to lose everything once she decided to end the affair, and how Kyle's involvement conveniently solved her problem. The image of the two as star-crossed lovers quickly faded, replaced by one of cunning and complicity. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached its verdict. Kyle Benson was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The jury believed that while he hadn't planned to kill Richard, his reckless actions had directly caused the death. Lena Morris was convicted of obstruction of justice and evidence tampering for deleting messages and attempting to mislead investigators. She received a 7-year sentence, with the possibility of parole after 4. When the final judgment was read, the courtroom fell silent. Lena's expression didn't change. She simply lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. Kyle stared ahead, tears forming in his eyes. The two never looked at each other again. After the trial, Richard Alden's mansion was sold. The proceeds donated to charity as his will had instructed. His estate funded scholarships for students at Greenridge University, the same institution where he had met the woman who would ultimately lead to his death. In town, his story became a cautionary tale whispered in quiet tones. A reminder that loneliness can make even the wisest person blind to danger. Years later, when people passed the hill where his mansion once stood, they often said the place still carried a strange heaviness, as if the echoes of that tragic night lingered in the air. Richard Alden's life had been filled with wealth and admiration, yet it ended with betrayal and silence. What began as a brief affair born of longing had spiraled into one of Greenridge's darkest stories, proof that behind charm and beauty, the human heart can hide secrets capable of destroying everything.